So if you remember in the late 90s and early 2000s, people would say, hey, turns out if you drink wine, you live longer. Maybe it has to do with the antioxidant benefits of grapes and blah, blah, blah. And there's all this explanation. And it turns out that this has now been debunked, and it's probably because rich people are more likely to drink wine, and it was being rich all along.
Yep.
How to be patient.
And welcome back to How to Be Patient, the podcast where we
don't talk about death for a day.
Yeah, no death. This
no
is just
existential themes today, guys.
Today, coffee, tea, and chit chat. And more than just my accent is actually the content of this episode, which is going to be coffee, tea intake, dementia risk, and cognitive function.
It's a journal club episode.
It's a journal club. You knew it was coming. You're getting JAMA mogged right now. So this is hot off the press. Not as hot as the coffee I had this morning, but this came out in early February, and this is a study done by the Harvard School of Public Health, and very interesting content we have here. But before we go any farther with this study...
Content being the journal article.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
Once said,
it's all content.
As you once said in our early 3 episodes, you said, what are academics but content creators that... And you didn't say this, but that don't get enough views.
True. Yeah.
And everything's
they're dry content creators is what they are.
I feel like we're like news.
For
those of you who are
less
listening,
velocity edits and and like zoom lens transitions. So
for those of you who are listening and not watching, I feel like we're like news anchors today with the and coming at you live out of Denver, coming at you live out of Chan Public School of Health at Harvard in Boston.
Try to give me your best news anchor voice.
Oh, I can't do it on the spot. I get nervous.
Okay.
I get nervous.
On the spot this afternoon, looking at Margaret, who is attempting to give her news anchor voice, but pressures seem a bit high.
It's too high. This is why I don't talk to camera on TikTok.
Dude, that was...
I can't do it. At first, I thought it was insecurity, and now it's just I truly look at the camera and I'm like, I have nothing for you. If you were talk to the camera for the next 10 minutes, I can talk to you because I'm pretending I'm just talking to you and no one else is here. And I'm like, let me yell at Preston for an hour. But if you were yell at the camera.
You always yell at me.
I know.
And now back to our main stories. So
right.
That was Margaret, everyone. Moving on with today's icebreaker. So the icebreaker is, what is your favorite way to consume caffeine?
I love a drip coffee. For me personally.
Mic drop. Who can say anything more than a drip coffee?
I love a drip coffee. I love, I have a Smeg coffee maker. So it's pastel blue and pretty.
I love Smeg.
Yeah. And then I set it like many coffee makers in 2026. You can set it the night before. And so I'll wake up in the morning and I have these lights that can be turned on by on a schedule. And so my lamps slowly start to turn on, and then my coffee starts brewing, and it's 5:45 in the morning because I'm going to teach Pilates, and it's great. So that's specifically the experience that I love. What about you, Preston?
Me, it's got to be a cortado, and I'm sharing my screen right now. Is this the Smeg coffee maker that you have?
Yes, but I have it in light blue. That one in the bottom right.
That is cute.
It's so cute.
Not sponsored, but Smeg, we love what you got going on.
I want one of their toasters so bad. I can't fork over the money for it. But
they have a fridge too.
That's never gonna happen. Our podcast would really have to pop off for
yeah.
That fridge.
My brother-in-law is from Costa Rica, and his whole family's down there, so we've gone to visit a couple times. And Costa Rica's whole thing is drip coffee. So, I found this out kind of as I was going down there because I like espresso, and I was like, oh, the espresso's gonna go crazy there, which it did. But every time I was asking about different espresso roasts or beans, the Costa Ricans be like, yeah, we can do it, but our thing is drip coffee. And I think one person told me at some point that I love espresso so much I should just go to Italy, which made sense. But one thing I really liked about Costa Rica is how precise they are about their bean growing. So coffee beans go really well in high altitudes and at like moist areas. So any place that you can think of that's like mountainous and jungly is like great for growing coffee beans. So like Costa Rica, Colombia, Ethiopia, I believe. Um, anyways, all that stuff aside, whenever I think about good drip coffee, I think about Costa Rica. Me, I'm an espresso guy, so it'd be Italy, which I've not been to Italy actually.
Really?
Ironically, just my my machines from Italy. It's a Laylit, which
And when did you discover that like espresso was the way you liked? Like when did you first start drinking coffee regularly?
probably in college, and I only consumed it as a means to an end. So I remember like I was at the Air Force Academy, and I would have like 10 minutes to eat in the cafeteria. And I distinctly remember like pouring the coffee from like that giant vat they had,
Yeah.
and then just grabbing like a handful of ice cubes and shoving it in there and being like, iced coffee. But I literally just made it iced coffee so that I could drink it faster and then go to class.
Yeah, like
Like it was
lukewarm
like
coffee.
bottoms up, this terrible coffee. You're gonna try your best to drink.
I similarly I started drinking coffee every day when I was like 15 because I had my first job when I was 15 at this like daycare, and I had to be there at like 6 in the morning, which is early when you're 15. And so my older brother Patrick, which Patrick, don't say I never mentioned you on the podcast. Um,
Yeah,
don't worry
Patrick,
about it.
you've been
He's been
mentioned.
like, should I come on the podcast? And I'm like, no. But I will give him this. I was like getting up for my first day of like ever of work, and he was like working in a construction job that summer, so he also had to be up really early. So he came into my room with this like old mug that was full of our dad's horrible, love you dad, but horrible Folgers like drip coffee. And it had like a ton of milk and like probably a third cup of sugar and a straw, like a bendy straw. And he goes, just drink this and trust me. And I was like, I don't like coffee. It tastes bad. And he's like, just trust me, Maggie. And like sat next to me while I drank it. And then he was like, 20 minutes later, he was like, how do you feel? And I was like, I feel fucking awesome. He was like, exactly.
You just unlocked this memory of being in the back of a car. Like my dad's driving me to like an early morning soccer game. You remember those like commute weekends where you have a
Yeah.
sports game somewhere? My dad's like, wake up. Here's some caffeinated chocolate. And I think I was like 10. I was like, Dad, this tastes so bitter. And then I remember afterwards him being like, yeah, how are you supposed to play in the game? You're in the back just sleeping. And I'm like, you need to get logged in. Or whatever the equivalent saying was at the time. So that was probably one of my earliest experiences with
It's like,
caffeine.
Dumbledore, you have to keep drinking. You have to keep,
Oh,
you keep drinking, Professor.
like, no. But I actually do like caffeinated chocolate now. Awake.
Oh, really?
You heard those chocolates are
Awake
awesome.
mentioned.
I love those. Yeah. Awake, if you like the podcast, we like you. But all our caffeine habits aside, we actually do have something interesting to talk about with coffee. And it's more than just coffee, it's also tea. So the paper that we're talking about today, this is Coffee and Tea Intake, Dementia Risk and Cognitive Function by Dr. Wang and colleagues. And what I kind of had planned for the episode is we're going to kind of discuss the format of the paper itself. We're going to kind of go through how they approach this study, and then we're going to look at the findings. And we're actually going to go take a global view and talk about their overall discussion and conclusion, and if we agree with it and what we kind of think some of the limitations of it are. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will get into the paper.
Sometimes emotion regulation looks like sensory comfort. And for all of my sensory comforts, I, like Preston is showing on the video right now, use Cozy Earth blankets, comforters, and socks. What do you use to comfort yourself, Preston?
I mean, I would show you the socks that I'm wearing, but I'm too comfy under this Cozy Earth cuddle blanket to get up. I'm actually not sure if I'll ever get up again. I might just live here.
Well, we'll talk about that later. But what you can trust is that there's 100 sleep guarantee to be able to return any products that aren't fitting with you, but we think you probably won't make many returns. And there's a 10-year guarantee.
So use our code PATIENT at CozyEarth.com and make sure you include us in the post-purchase survey because we did send you.
And in the meantime, we wish you a lot of emotion regulation. You're going to need it for the rest of this episode.
Or at least a blanket. I always love it, kind of like going through these because I like remind myself of the like epidemiology training that I had, or like those practice questions we took. So there's there are like cohort studies and case control studies, and they have associated like outcomes that we're looking for. If you're in med school, you remember like going through all this stuff. This one is a cohort study. So for those that aren't familiar, essentially this is where you follow a group of people and then you see what happens to them. So they are starting out with this cohort from the NHS trial, and that's not the National Health Society, that's the Nurses Health Study and the Health Professions FS trial, which is just a bunch of male doctors
Is
or
it
male health
doctors?
professionals.
Male health
Sorry?
professionals.
Yeah.
Is it just like broadly male health professionals?
hmm So that's actually the two genders. So both of these groups were enrolled in between like 1975 and 1980. They had about 120,000 nurses between ages 30 and 55 enrolled starting in 1976. And then there were about 51,000 male healthcare workers in 1986 enrolled between the ages of 40 to 75. Now, these are like giant studies that multiple papers have come off. Like they didn't do this study just for this one coffee tea intake paper. Like the nurses health study has multiple arms. They start cohorts at different times. So I think they have another cohort they started in 2001, another one they started in 2020, I believe. And there's been a lot of really important data that's come out of the nurses health study. Like they got information on the association between OCPs and cancer risk. It uncovered a lot to do with like the strong associations between cardiovascular risk and smoking. So there are many things that have come out of studying this cohort. So this is just kind of like one of the most recent things.
Yeah. And this paper came out in February this year, right?
So more fresh than that Folgers coffee your brother brought you.
Hey, that half cup of sugar helped.
Yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully we won't need a cup of sugar for this one. The the hypothesis overall is that increased coffee, tea, and caffeine and overall caffeine intake will be associated with a lower risk of incidence of dementia. And kind of like looking at the broad like scientific method applied here, we have our independent variable and our dependent variable. So the independent variable is like gross caffeine intake, which was kind of actually the second variable. The first one was coffee, tea, and decaffeinated coffee intake.
I just want to pause just in case for people like also who maybe aren't used to this form of what we're doing in terms of journal club. I think one of the things that is pointed out in the paper as well is just to say at the top, the question for the paper is what they are trying to find out from this cohort is long-term intake of caffeinated and decaffeinated coffee associated with risk of dementia and cognitive outcomes. Just to put that out there concretely, like that is what everything else we're about to talk about is describing the methods of how they're trying to see if their kind of original assumption or question is answerable from the data.
Right. Because that's how hard, cold, complicated science is done. You ask a question and then you figure out how to answer it. You don't just think really hard about it and decide what you've concluded.
You don't say I did the research and my grandma experienced this.
Yeah, exactly. Because there are a lot of people that are asking this question. Does long-term caffeinated beverage consumption have any association with the risk of dementia incidents? And I think they put together a great answer. So when we kind of take that question, parse it out into how do you investigate it, we then have those independent variables and dependent variables like we talked about. So the independent being how much caffeine, coffee, tea are you consuming? And then the dependent variables being subjective cognitive decline or how much you perceive your like thinking to decrease, and also incidence of dementia. Either diagnosis of like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, things like that. So remember, dementia is a clinical syndrome, not necessarily um, not necessarily associated with one singular neurodegenerative disease. So when we're looking at like how they parsed out the cohorts, this is a giant group, right? So we have, I want to say like 150,000, 170,000 starting potential candidates between the 120,000 from the Nurses' Health Study and the 51,000 from the male health professionals. They went through some exclusionary criteria. So if you recall, like some of the men started between ages 40 and 75. So some people actually already had dementia at the start of this study. So those people were excluded. Anyone with cancer was excluded, and then anyone who just did not include their caffeinated intake was excluded. So for most people, like even if they said 0, that was answering your caffeinated intake. But some people just like were lost to follow, but didn't answer that at all. So those people were excluded. And then the last group that was excluded was people with implausible reported energy intake.
Preston, why do you think that they excluded those people?
I think it's really just like a question of the validity of the answers that you're getting. I mean, like humans
agree.
are notoriously bad at self-reporting. There are plenty of studies that we do where you ask someone how many calories they think they eat in a day, and then you follow them with a clipboard and record how many they eat. But people that are like that far off the mark, it's like how close are you to everything else? And for context, the implausible energy consumption rates were like less than 500 calories a day for females, and I think for males it was
Less than
less than
800 or greater
and
than
more than like
4,200.
4,200.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of calories,
Yeah.
or little. So
Why do you think they
this
excluded people with a history of cancer? Like
um
specifically cancer? I don't know. I actually don't have an answer for this, but I thought that
yeah
because they had like dementia and then Parkinson's, which makes sense to me. But then cancer was interesting as like an illness, broad illness subset to carve out.
yeah, I'm not sure. I think it was just like it's so strong of a confounder in itself for like other either caffeine consumption or cognitive decline,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
one of the outcomes we're looking at is subjective cognitive decline, which could be like directly related to cancer, and it's a whole body illness that I think is like hard to parse out. They did other subgroup analysis, but I think they were just did not want to include cancer in
Yeah.
that.
But like the thing is, and maybe it's because like that can be parsed out more or whatever, but it's just interesting that like category was input there because you could make a similar argument for like um I don't know, a history of substance use or a history of like psychiatric, like there's other comorbid with dementia things that I would think more than so anyway, interesting. And just sorry, I do love digging into this throughout of just like why do we think that they excluded that?
No, it's good, and like I can frame myself as interpreting your hypotheticals instead of like when you ask like why do you think they didn't include cancer? It's like that that sends me into like med student mode, you know?
Oh
Like
no, I don't mean to. I'm
no,
sorry.
and I don't think you're pimping me. But I was just like, oh God, I
No,
don't
I don't
know. I
know.
didn't even
Yeah.
think.
But I feel like this
um
is like such a good example for like when we talk about like what is it that you do in med school and residency or like people who are actually in research, which like we're not primarily researchers at this point in our careers, but like what does it mean? We talk in like literature a lot or in art about like staying with the art and really like taking it in and thinking about it. And like a journal club done well is doing that, where we're not necessarily, I'm not trying to pimp you. I'm really just trying to think out loud together. But like when it's done well, it like really helps us understand sort of like when we did with the like your brain on ChatGPT, like why this amount of time? It's like, oh, well, it was actually just a logistical thing. We didn't have money to do this or like whatever. Or this other piece of research showed us that this is the thing. So
yeah, and I like it when there's that simple of an answer. No, I'll survive. So I'll just press and projecting. Um, so we have our cohort that we have our exclusionary criteria, and then there is 121 oh sorry 130,000 left standing after they were excluded. It feels like a game show. And the contestants still left to
the
drink
price is right.
caffeine. 130,000 view, like we're on like a Mr. Beast video or something. So then we actually have to look at how we're following them up with their dietary and cognitive assessments. So every 2 to 4 years, people would reach out and call the participants and ask them to fill out these validated, I think, FSQ or FFS questionnaires, essentially all the things that they're eating over the course of a week. Those questionnaires have been validated against like other 7-day dietary patterns. So they feel pretty good about actually the quality of information from the people reporting plausible caloric intake, what they're eating. And then for the cognitive assessments, there's kind of two branches to this one. So they gave everyone a subjective cognitive question over the phone. They essentially asked them yes or no questions, 7 total questions. Do you feel like you're having less energy to the day? Do you feel as your concentration's declining? Is it harder for you to remember things? Stuff like that. And then if people answered yes to more than 3 of those questions, that was kind of considered like significant or positive. Um, and then they did actual objective cognitive testing where they had people recall things from the Boston naming test. They had them say digits forward and digits backwards, and this was all done over the phone. So it's impressive the amount of manpower that goes into these studies. You're calling hundreds of thousands of people and doing like subsets of the MoCA with them over the phone. So I just kind of want to take a moment and say, wow, guys, that that is incredible.
And thank you, nurses and male healthcare professionals, whoever you are,
Thanks for
male
picking up the
healthcare
phone.
professionals. Yeah, thank you for doing that probably amidst your many hours of shifts.
Just to, can you imagine you're in this study, you finish a 12-hour surgery, all you want to do is go home, and they're like, do you have a second to do digits forward and digits backward?
For the
Like,
love of the game.
oh, God. Fuck this study. Why did I join this? And then looking at the dietary intake more focused, they divided people into quartiles for their caffeine consumption. So if you look at coffee, tea, and decaffeinated coffee, they had the first quartile, which is the lowest amount of consumption, which was essentially 0 cups per day. And then the next quartile was less than a cup per day. So most people would be doing like 0.2 and 0.8 cups per day. You're not like literally drinking 0.8 cups per day, but it's like, I'll have a cup of coffee every other day or every third day. And then after that was 1 to 2.5 cups per day was the third quartile. And the fourth quartile, the highest, was 2.5 or more cups per day. And interestingly, the females in like the nurses cohort
I know.
consumed much more coffee than the men.
Yeah.
So each quartile was like a little bit staggered. Like the highest quartile for men was like 2 cups or more a day. And for women, the highest quartile was 4.5 cups or more a day.
Well, it's interesting to think about like how, again, I don't know, and I'm sure this data is available that we could look into, but like does the study control for night shift? Does the study control for the like most nurses are working 12s? And I think they were working 12s still even then, maybe longer. And was there a variety of like male healthcare professionals that were in all and like that those changed a lot? And then just like probably other things related to lifestyle and things. But it is, I did notice that. It's interesting that it's like a much higher average in terms of like the quartiles for women.
Mm-hmm. This is probably not based on anything, but I was just picturing those giant Starbucks iced coffees in
I
like a
know, but this is
Stanley
not
cup.
that
And I was,
timeline.
yeah, you're right. I guess
Yeah.
this is, I mean, some of it's within the last 20 years, the last 10
Is
years,
it? When did
because
it end?
this is every 2 to 4 years.
And is it ongoing?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So at some point it was. So
I'm
what
not
is the
sure
1980s
when.
version of that?
Yeah, it's like diner coffee.
Yeah.
But they did control for, and I'm glad you're bringing that up, is smoking, BMI, ApoE4 alleles, and Alzheimer's disease polygenic risk factor scores. So essentially, and for those that aren't familiar, when you're controlling in these kind of cohorts, is you compare all the results among a subgroup. So for that like quartile of people that don't drink coffee, you then divide them further into people who don't drink coffee and smoke, and compare within those people and people who don't drink coffee and don't smoke, because you don't want it to be confounded, like basically a variable that affects both the start and the outcome. And those were like the biggest confounding concerns for the development of dementia that they wanted to control for.
One of the things, I guess, and this just to point out to our listeners for this paper, one of the reasons that they are looking at coffee versus tea versus decaffeinated coffee, which is not 0 caffeine, but is much, much lower. And then I don't know how much caffeine is in tea. And they also didn't like specify what kind of tea. That was in one of the limitations in the paper. But the point of this is to like look at like caffeine versus like organic compounds in coffee that might be helpful. Because if like decaf coffee was as good as regular coffee and there was no benefit in tea or something with caffeine, then it would be like, oh, it's not the caffeine factor. So this is part of why these groups, just for our listeners, for some explanation of like, why do we care about decaf versus regular?
Right. Because you can imagine someone would reasonably come up, and if you say like, hey, drinking coffee is good for you, must be the caffeine. They're like, well, maybe it's just the coffee, and caffeine has nothing to do with it. Um, the I just looked it up. So decaffeinated coffee still contains about 5 milligrams of caffeine per 8-ounce cup. So they clear about 97% of the caffeine from it. So there's trace amounts in there. And then yeah, like tea, it's gonna vary by the tea type, which has the most caffeine. I think black tea has the most caffeine. Green tea has a decent amount of caffeine too. But each of these, they also have their own separate, independent organic compounds, like
Right,
within coffee and
exactly.
within tea.
Yeah.
So, kind of like now getting into the interesting and important results. And I'll break this kind of down by quartile.
Mhm.
And I'm going to read off right now is the respective incidence for each quartile per 100,000 person years. And that the person year is kind of an abstract metric. So we'll try to explain it now. But it's essentially like if you're looking at an aggregate group or population data, it's the total amount of years lived. So uh, I don't know why the easiest metaphor for me is to look at like risks of like car accidents, where instead of like person years, it's like car miles or something. So, if you're trying to talk about like what is the risk of a tire blowing on a Honda Civic, they will say, okay, for you know one Honda Civic, it might be a certain risk, or another, it's a higher risk. But what if you're only driving one Honda Civic like to and from the grocery store, and the other one you're driving across the country? Well, if you're looking at all Honda Civics together, you just include the total amount of miles that every Honda Civic has driven, and then you take that and you divide that under the amount of tires that get blown. So then it's like, okay, incidence of the event over total miles driven. So this is incidence of dementia, who developed dementia over total amount of years lived by these patients or
Whereas
subjects.
if you could imagine in like the car analogy, like a different way to look at the statistics could make things much more binary and make them yes or no, which is to say, did this car ever have a tire blow in its whole span? Which would maybe help answer some types of questions about the car and buying cars and their use, but it doesn't answer the same types of questions that answering, does the tire blow every 500 miles or every 2,000 miles? And so I think, again, not a perfect analogy, but these different ways of moving the statistics around. First of all, I know we probably have some statisticians who listen to this podcast. And if you find errors in how we talk about this, please let us know, because neither of us have a PhD in stats the last time I checked. And I think that, just as like an aside, sorry to interrupt you.
We're trying and we get stuff wrong.
No, but I think you're getting this right. But this is just an aside, which is like, for our people listening, he's giving a heart, hands, fingers. This is why we get pissed off about things where it's like a paper like this comes out and then you see like an online publication or your favorite like wellness TikToker be like, and you see this study showed that there was 100 more people with dementia or something if they didn't drink this coffee. And it's even better, and like misinterpret the data. And we're like trying to be super careful and thoughtful after being in the field for like 8 years. And be like, okay, I think I'm getting the statistical analysis right, which we're not even getting into like real depth with this, like how they actually divided things out and like going into further things on that, which is just to say that this is very complex stuff. And it's why we say don't jump to conclusions based on one paper. But all of that was an aside. I'm sorry. But I do feel like this is part of the point of journal clubs on this podcast, is to be like, let's learn better and also see what conversations do actually come up when we talk about it in depth and don't just accept a headline.
Yeah, absolutely. And as easy and fun as it is for us to just throw headlines up and get clicks, we're here to yap. So we
We're here
gotta
for
do just
nuance.
that. So to get to the punchline now, so per 100,000 person years, the first quartile, that like low coffee drinking group, had 354 incidences of dementia. and then going up to between, 0.2 to 0.8 cups per day, it was 302 incidences of dementia. Then at 1 cup or more was 226. And at 2.5 cups or more was 94. So there was actually like a pretty significant step down from 354 incidents of dementia per 100,000 person years at no coffee or caffeine intake to down to 94. So it's almost a third for the group that was drinking the highest amount of caffeine or moderate amounts.
A
And
relative
then,
third.
yeah, relative third. And then taking that same data for decaffeinated coffee, they converted that into tertiles, which I'd never heard that before. It's like a quartile, but it's 3. So it's a tertile. And it's just funny for me.
Oh, like tertiary.
Yeah.
Okay. We love, as we
Tertiles.
said, we love root words here.
Yeah. So basically the tertiles for decaffeinated coffee were no decaf coffee, a little bit of decaf coffee, and a lot of decaf coffee. And their incidence was 259, 219, 262. So actually it was not unchanged between those who drank a ton of decaf coffee and those that really didn't drink any decaf coffee.
And
And
was that
is really
value
interesting.
significant? Like, was the p-value significant for that? Like, was there, because I thought there was overlap for the decaf, like there was no significant difference when it came to the confidence
Correct.
intervals.
So
that could be the wrong term for this, actually, now that I said that. But
no, I believe they did a 2-sided t-test for these, and they were insignificant for decaffeinated coffee, and then they were significant for the quartiles between the caffeinated coffee and tea beverages. So when we're talking about a p-value, what we're saying is that this is the percent chance that it all could have just happened via chance. And usually in statistics, we accept something if it's a 95% chance of being statistically accurate, which the p-value is just the inverse of that. So it'd be 0.5 or 0.05. That's just how we present it. But a p-value less than 0.05 means that essentially there's a greater than 95% chance that this is not just random. And there's a 5% chance that maybe, looking at the data, it just randomly happened to line up like this.
Right. Yeah.
Because there's always a chance, you leave enough monkeys in front of a typewriter, they're going to produce Shakespeare. You happen to look at data and then a correlation may come out of it, but it may actually not have a relationship. So this is significant or much more likely to have a relationship than not.
And that's why we gotta replicate the studies. Well, not this one, but you know what I mean. That's why we talk about that. And then we talk about the
I don't
evidence
think I have time to call 100,000 nurses.
Maybe you do.
If I put my mind to it, I might be able to.
You're like, can I make 100,000 new friends in this hospital before I graduate?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Try.
I do know some people though who does seem like they know every single person in the hospital, and you're like, how do you do this?
You could do this with social media, probably.
That's true. Okay. So a lot of coffee good, but not too much coffee. Decaf coffee, not a big difference in dementia.
Exactly. So that's relevant because now people are wondering, okay, is it just the caffeine itself that's making the difference?
Like, can I take my Alani Nu and just call it a day?
And we're gonna talk about the limitations really quick, and then we'll kind of get into like why it may just be the caffeine that's helpful. So a couple things to keep in mind, because this is pretty compelling data, that we have basically a dose-dependent or stepwise decrease in dementia incidence with increased caffeine or coffee and tea intake, is that they did not differentiate between types of coffee and tea.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you're taking green tea, black tea, you have Robusta beans, Arabica, you're taking espresso shots, drip coffee, cortados, lattes, who knows if one's better than the other.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe everyone who's not drinking decaf coffee, they're all just going for drip coffee, and that's the real benefit. But who's to say, right? And it could be possible that the overwhelming amount of tea drinkers were drinking green tea, but there's like less benefits in black tea. Who knows? So that's just like one limitation. The other one is that correlation does not equal causation, which we always have to take into account. So there could be a potential reverse causal pattern where we have to think of, what if instead of caffeine preventing dementia, dementia prevents caffeine. So it's possible that patients experiencing prodromal development of dementia have actually just been lowering their caffeine intake. So what if when I start to get Alzheimer's, I just feel like drinking less coffee? And that's why we're seeing that. And so in that case, caffeine would be the canary in the coal mine that's signaling us that someone has dementia rather than preventing it from happening. So we always have to keep that into account. We're seeing a correlation in this cohort study, but we can't assume perfect causation. The other one is that we can't account for all the confounders. So we did try to look at the confounders like smoking, BMI, the APOE4 alleles, which are the high-risk fields for Alzheimer's, and the Alzheimer's like polygenic risk scores. But there are many other confounders like socioeconomic status, race. I guess we did look at gender between them. But there's technically an infinite amount of potential confounders here that we can't take into account. So we have to always cite that as a limitation. And then finally, the objective cognitive testing was only really done in the nursing cohort. So on the male cohort, they only did the subjective cognitive screen. They didn't actually do numbers forward and backwards. So there are some differences in the groups. I think both groups were powered enough. We have 50,000 versus 86,000, or 40,000 versus 86,000. So I think there's plenty of numbers, but there are possible differences in the groups and how they got data from them. What are your thoughts about the limitations of the study? Does it make you want to throw this thing in the trash?
No, not at all. I mean, I think probably similar to you that, well, I actually don't know what you think yet. I think that this is a really powered paper. It has limitations, as all good papers recognize that they do. I think you could come up with a million things that could confound it, even to the extent that, is it actually the coffee? Not many things for correlating, but also, is it the coffee, as an ingredient that actually is neuroprotective? Or is it the fact that most people drink coffee and then they go and do more because of the neuroactive impact of the coffee? And those other things are actually the things that make them, they're more cognitively active. They have a job. They're engaging with other people socially. That makes it, that could be one of many
is
possible.
Coffee a tool to a healthier lifestyle? And that healthier lifestyle is really what preventing your risk of dementia. I think that's a great point. And so we are going to take another quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about these confounders and also dig a little bit into the science of why caffeine might be the thing that's helping. Margaret, I loved your point about caffeine or coffee just being a tool to living a more active, healthier, maybe more social lifestyle. Because when I was thinking about the limitations of this paper, one place my mind went was those old, I guess they're urban legends now, but a lot of the studies on wine and longevity.
Yeah.
So if you remember in the late 90s and early 2000s, people would say, hey, turns out if you drink wine, you live longer. Maybe it has to do with the antioxidant benefits of grapes and blah, blah, blah. And there's all this explanation. And it turns out that this has now been debunked. And it's probably because rich people are more likely to drink wine. And it was being rich all along.
Yep.
That was the most important thing about
it was
living
being
long.
Rich and having friends. It was oh.
Yeah. It's
and universal health care.
Right. Once we controlled for being rich and looked at rich people with friends who do drink wine, rich people with friends that don't drink wine, wine was no longer beneficial. And if anything, it was deleterious. And so the official advice at this point is no amount of alcohol is healthy or good for you. And even small amounts can have significant risks for cancer, cardiovascular disease, X, Y, Z. So we do not say that alcohol is good or healthy for you, that you should drink it. But for a while, we used to think that. And that's what happens with these studies. And one of the other things that they didn't include when they did these initial studies was the nuances in the groups that abstained from the groups that still drank. So actually, there was a lot of unhealthy people in the groups that abstained because they were alcoholics for 30 years. And then they quit drinking and still had a lot of the sequelae of those problems. But when the study went through, they were like, do you drink? How healthy are you? Wow. People that don't drink are kind of healthy.
Turns out tequila is good for you, and I'm sponsored by them.
It's no, they stopped drinking because they didn't want to die. Now you're just asking them if they drink or not.
Can I tell you something related to our so while we were doing this and we asked what kind of coffee were the nurses drinking in the 80s, I texted my
Mhm.
dad who trained in the 80s and I said,
Oh,
"Dad,
wow.
what kind of coffee were the nurses drinking in the 80s?" And he goes, "Yes, they were drinking a lot of coffee, bad coffee that tasted like cigarette butts. And then there was a problem with leaving styrofoam cups sitting around and where all of us would write our notes. They had a huge stack of charts in the back." So that was live from the 80s. Bad
Maybe it was the
hospital
cigarette
coffee.
butts all along that are preventing the dementia.
But there was also more
They didn't
smoking
confound for the
around
cigarette
the
butts.
hospital then. I think it was like there were cigarettes being smoked outside the hospital by nursing doctors and all staff and still. And then there was also just the like dregs upon dregs of coffee that was like where the coffee hospital or the hospital coffee came from. So I just wanted to you got to give a personal source if you have one, right?
Yeah, that's great. Back when spilling coffee on the chart was a problem, you can
I
just pull up
know.
haiku on your phone. So, cigarette butts aside, caffeine in coffee has its own specific things that may be helpful. So there's known neuroprotective and stimulating properties in caffeine. And this has actually been established in a couple different papers that have at least just looked at associations between decreased incidence of dementia and caffeine consumption. I think this is the most powered one, high powered one that I've seen, but it's not the first to come to this conclusion. One of the possible mechanisms of caffeine and preserving cognitive function or preventing incidence of dementia is the antagonism of the adenosine receptors. So the A1 and A2 receptors are blocked by caffeine, which suppresses the proliferation and accumulation of A beta amyloid. So it may literally like stop the like kind of clumping of the proteins that we know to be associated with dementia. It also might lower pro-inflammatory cytokines. So these are things like our interleukins or our prostaglandins that lead to inflammation in astrocytes that might cause scarring or be more likely to contribute to downstream um, immune or inflammatory processes that hurt your cognition. I don't want to go too far into the weeds of this, partly because I don't have the ability to, but also it's some I feel almost like a little wellnessy when I say like it decreases inflammation,
Right.
but
Yeah.
it actually does attenuate inflammatory responses in your brain, and that is helpful for preventing against cognitive decline.
I mean, I think that's one of the true things about is like the wellness world takes claims that are like actually true and then amplifies them to the point that they're not true and then makes them somehow hyper exclusive and niche rather than just like a cup of coffee and a walk might be good for your brain. And it's like I have a coffee with mushrooms and ecstasy in it and then you're going to do this very specific walking protocol
And
for the
also
low
it's an
cost
enema.
$200.
And
And also
because you want the true anti-inflammatory properties, it's going to bypass your liver.
right. We're going to give your liver the week off. We're going to give all the rest of your organs a bad time.
Next up, eyeball shots with matcha. So the other possible benefits of uh, caffeine may be more indirect. So
Mm.
we know that caffeine affects insulin sensitivity in a good way. It makes you more sensitive to insulin, which you rarely hear about. Usually, it's you're less sensitive to insulin and more prone to diabetes. I had a colleague the other day say, "You know what type 3 diabetes is?" And I was like, "What, Kenny?" And he goes, "Alzheimer's." Which is it's a way to put it. I don't know if I agree with that claim, but
Yeah.
ultimately, if you have elevated levels of high blood sugar, it can cause damage to cadherins, to the like structural tissues in your blood vessels, which increase your risk of dementia. And so anything that's going to lower your risk of developing diabetes may also lower your risk of dementia.
Mhm.
And then finally, we haven't talked much about the tea, but there's obviously caffeine in tea, but tea also contains L-theanine, green tea does, and oh my gosh, I'm gonna mess this up. It's epigalactico catechin. EGCG, which also has a lot of anti-inflammatory benefits. It inhibits the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines as well. So there are some compounds that are unique to tea that are not in coffee that they have their own both pro-cognitive and anti-inflammatory benefits. The other thing in coffee are these phenols or phenolindane. So I became interested in these because they taste really bitter.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm trying to like dial in my espresso shot, you actually there's like different like acetics and like linolenic acids that make it more like kind of sour at the beginning of the shot, and that comes out really early when you pull the shot. But later in the shot, these phenols, these alkaline phenylendanes come out and they make this shot taste more bitter. If you do a good job of balancing that out, like when you time the espresso shot, you can actually get to a pH of like 6 or 7 and it tastes pretty smooth. But if you screw it up, or if you fuck it up, you you can have a super sour shot with a pH of like 3 or 4, or you can like, get above 7 and taste really bittery.
Do you want to tell them that you have pH strips?
Yeah, I have. So I got pH strips and I started dropping my coffee on the pH strips just to kind of see where I was
acid
at.
and you're like, yeah, I'm making coffee. Do you want to come over? I'm going to go to Dunkin' tomorrow morning and order a Dunkin' latte and be like, can you make sure the pH of that is alkaline? I need the shot at the forward part to be a little sour, and they're going to be like, bitch, this is a Dunkin' Donuts.
I would like extra phenylendanes if you could do that, please.
Can you pH test it? Okay.
Anyways, these phenylendanes, they actually have been shown in vitro to inhibit both tau and A beta amyloid aggregation. The only compound we've seen that inhibits both. Yeah, only one we've seen that does both of them. So it's also really fascinating. So, but all that decaffeinated coffee, that has phenylendanes in it, and they didn't see any difference in the incidence of dementia. So
yeah, this is where we run into a lot of the stuff where I feel like there becomes issues with a lot of like, on one hand, like I think nutritional psychiatry has a lot of good evidence for broad kind of simple changes to people's diets. But I do feel like this gets in that realm too. And the lead author, not the first author, but the last author of this paper does work in this and does great research. But I think this is what you run into in this kind of research, which is hard, which is like actual science trying to figure out what element of this food or compound or whatever is helping, and then not having it be taken by the wellness world and be like, it is that element in it. And so we hyper concentrated it in a lab and now you can shoot it into your nose. Like, you're never going to be...
Introducing phenolindane nasal spray.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't worry about the headaches. That's just your plaques being broken up. And if your nose is bleeding, it's because the inflammation's going down. It's a good thing.
It's a good thing. It's the inflammation and the spirits are coming out of your nose, out of your body. The 4 humors are perfectly balanced now.
Well, that was all I really had for the scientific mechanisms of it.
I have one. I have one thing.
Oh yeah, go for it.
I looked for one of the things that I learned when we were doing our episode on ChatGPT, with the paper and with the paper's author, was to actually look for context of the author talking about the paper if it exists. And you were tricky with this one because this one just came out. But the Harvard Gazette did a piece on this article. Shout out Mass General Brigham Communications. Not a real person was cited. But they quote Daniel Wang, who is the primary lead, I think, of this body of research. But he is quoted as saying, while our results are encouraging, it's important to remember that the effect size is small and there are lots of important ways to protect cognitive function as we age, which is the most scientist thing to say ever. Which is like, yeah, I worked on this for a long time, but take it with a grain of salt. All research is we're all just seeking truth, and take it and don't run too far with it.
Yeah, get back here. Stop that. Put your 6th cup of coffee down and
please
get some sleep.
Don't misquote And then the person who is the first author, who's Yu Zhang, who's a student at Harvard Chan School and a research trainee at Mass General Brigham, said, we also compared people with different genetic predispositions to developing dementia and saw the same results, meaning coffee or caffeine is likely equally beneficial for people with high and low genetic risk of developing dementia, which may be from a different study that they did. But I love when they get the first author and the last author in on this.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
take it, this is important. This is cool work. These are cool results. And they exist within, they didn't just fall off a
The
coconut
real
tree.
world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shout out Kamal Harris. The
Shout
other
out.
thing that they mentioned towards the end, which I think we know intuitively, which is if you drink too much coffee, that can lead to increased levels of anxiety and decreased levels of sleep, which also have their own independent risk factors. So we saw, and remember when we were looking at the effect size, it's greatest at the moderate level. And once you go past that, 3 to 4 cups a day, they didn't get any additional benefit, which part of it may just be you can't absorb any more caffeine, but also you start running into the deleterious effects of caffeine. So does it mean go jump on your caffeine fast and do 6 coffee enemas tonight? It's just keep doing all the healthy, normal things. And your caffeine is not as much of a vice as it is if people say it is. And you have this paper to show that, if anything.
I think that's actually super important because the cortisol divas online that have been selling adrenal fatigue stuff and you have cortisol, this, that, and the other, love to be if you have coffee, it's stressing your body out. And that's why you are ugly and broke and why you're going to go to hell and whatever. But at least from the dementia risk.
Can't get a boyfriend.
You can't get a boyfriend because your cortisol, you moon faces, is what they're saying.
Yeah. And it's all because that coffee you drink.
And it's just girl, just enjoy your coffee. All right. Just let us enjoy our coffee. But yeah, this is a really great paper.
I know a lot of people that they say I'm trying to get off of caffeine. I just don't want to be addicted to something. You heard people say that at one point?
Yes.
And to that I say, so what? Enjoy your coffee. If you get withdrawal headache, okay. But people that drink 2 to 3 cups of coffee have decreased incidence of dementia and less subject to cognitive decline as they go through life. So there are worse vices to have. I always say, there are people that are struggling with heroin use. Enjoy your Starbucks.
You always say that.
Just my grandma used to say.
We do, I think we've said this on here. This is not a carcinogen, but we choose our risk factors. I always think, we choose our own carcinogens, and some are worse, some are better in terms of how quickly they will come home to roost. But we all choose our own risks. And I think we're here to just not fearmonger you. Although I will say a lot of our listeners are healthcare workers, and I think that you are drinking the coffee regardless. But
exactly.
Be confident in it.
Running is bad for your knees. Not running is bad for your knees. At some point, your knees are going to give out. So just do what you feel like. That's right. That's the existential part at the end.
Preston asked me if Lent was over yet, and I said no. And just to give what you just said a little bit more, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So, including your knees home in the step challenge.
Yeah, I got to get on that. Okay, so we're going to step away and do the Patreon section.
The private club,
which is going to be me making espresso. I'm going to bring you guys over to my espresso setup, and we're gonna test out this dementia preventing elixir ourselves. And then next time that I lead an episode, we're going to be doing our final existential psychotherapy bit on the meaning in our lives.
You can catch the next part of this on Patreon.
It's patreon.com/happypatientpod. And we are back from the Patreon section. That coffee smells good. I know Margaret can't smell it, but through the screen, it looked good.
I mean, it's 9 p.m. where I am. You're drinking coffee at 8 p.m.
I drink coffee whenever I feel like it.
Your sleeps.
Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Thank you all for joining the step challenge. So some of y'all are mogging us right now. I'm pulling up the results, and I am 10th. With 38,000 steps. Max.
I'm 11.
Good Lord. 57,772 steps. Isabella is 11,000 behind her at 46,000, and Anna G 42,617. So those are our top 3. This is 3 days into the step challenge.
Max is currently averaging 12,800, which I'm like, those numbers aren't adding up. So she's at 57,000.
So I'm looking at her profile, and her picture is this is the Tokyo. It's the Tokyo Marathon 2026. So like, she did not come to play. She's probably in the middle of her like marathon training right now, and she's like, oh yeah, I'll just get the steps in.
I'll get in here. Shout out also to the DM who said we need to ban marathon runners, and I said, or we need to rise their level, and I just got a thumbs down.
There are 68 of y'all in the challenge so far, and if you want to join, it's still not too late. Basically, if you get the Pacer app, it's free to download, and then once you get it, it will sync to your Apple Fitness account, and then it will just kind of like, it'll retroactively include all the steps that you've been getting over the week. So if you have an Apple Watch or anything that's tracking your steps, you can still join later on, and you won't be, 0 while Mags has 150,000 steps.
And you can listen to the podcast. You can listen to Patreon. You can also do what I do, which is I can only scroll while I stroll for the most part. So I can only be on TikTok when I'm on my little walking pad or commuting home and like waiting for the bus. Tick walk. Yeah. Walk. Yeah. Walk talk. Walk talk.
That's probably better. Walk talk.
Tick walk. It kind of has something to it.
Tick walk and talk. Anyways,
while I talk it.
Whoa, that's good. I like that. Or I make stir fry while I scroll, so then I also walk it while I talk it.
Let's talk about how good the song Stir Fry is on the next episode, but we'll leave it there.
Let us know what you think of the show, how the step challenge is going. Can y'all DM us pictures of you walking for your step challenge so we can repost them on our story, because we've been having a lot of fun with this.
Yeah.
Like always, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Human Content Pods. How to Be Patient Instagram page now has more than 4,000 subscribers or followers.
There will be a season.
There will be a 5th season. We've been renewed by ourselves.
Are we on the 4th season right now?
Shout out to all the listeners that are... What?
Wait, we're in our 4th season right now?
No, we're in our 3rd season.
Okay, so it'll be a 4th.
I'm skipping.
I was like...
And a 5th season.
We get to 5,000. Yeah, endless. Endless.
Actually, I
the person who wins the step challenge gets to be our 3rd co-host. Sorry. Okay, we gotta end this episode, guys.
you can always find full episodes on my YouTube at It's Presro, or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you want to listen. We're your hosts, Preston Roche and Margaret Duncan. Our executive producers are me, Preston Roche, Margaret Duncan, Will Flannery, Kristen Flannery, Aaron Corney, Rob Goldman, and Shanti Brooke. Our editor and engineer is Jason Portizo. Our music is by Omer Benz-V. To learn more about our program disclaimer, ethics policy, submission verification, licensing terms, and our HIPAA release terms, go to howtobepatientpod.com or reach out to us at howtobepatient@human-content.com with any questions or concerns. How to Be Patient is a Human Content production. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more of us, or if you want to see, this is Lilac, she's my cat. She's going to be waving her hand at one of the floating boxes, which will lead to more episodes. Lilac, point to the other episodes. Lilac doesn't know what the internet is, but I swear they're there. They probably exist for real. But in the meantime, I'm just going to pet Lilac, and then I'm going to go dance in the background.